Hello, my creative friends. Welcome to Painting Crafty, and I'm Melanie, and today's another Thursday paint along. And today I'm going to be walking you through the steps of how I created this pretty little watercolor painting inside of a glass jar in a pretty little bouquet. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how you can make sure that your glass container looks like glass, as well as some ideas of how to paint these beautiful little flowers and how do you make white daisies look white. For those of you who'd like to have some help drawing, like you like to paint, but you're not much into drawing, I do have a sketchbook membership, and that's where I have all the tracers for any of the paintings that I do on my YouTube channel. I know not everyone likes to draw, so I can do the drawing part, and then it makes a great trace and paint option for yourself. They come in 3 different sizes that once you join the membership, you get a 5x7, which is this size, which makes beautiful cards. I do include a small little size, which makes great like trading cards or looks really pretty in some of those cute little small frames, as well as a larger size that fits about an 8x10 canvas, especially if you would like to do it in acrylic painting or in a mixed media. So many different options, because once it's drawn, you can trace it and then you can use your favorite art mediums to create whatever you would like or however you would like to create it. Well, let's get started. I can't wait to show you how easy it is to create these glass looking jars. I used my tracer and I made another copy of my painting and I traced it onto the Canson watercolor paper, the 140 pound. It's considered a student grade, but it's my go-to paper. I love it because the price point is great. I can get really consistent, great looks with this paper, and I really like the smooth quality of the paper. I use the Paul Rubin watercolors, but I always say spend a little bit more money on your watercolor paper and just buy the watercolors you can afford. To paint my paintings today, I'm using the Princeton Velvet Touch watercolor brushes. I'm going to have links down inside of the description box for many of the items I'm using. So go ahead and check out the links if you might be interested in purchasing any of these products. I start with my number 8 brush and I just dab those cone flower areas, tap in some clear water. And then I'm going to start the painting process with the blue color called Sky Blue. Now with watercolor, you're always painting the shadows. So the first layer I'm putting on are actually the highlights for these flowers. These are going to be my brightest, lightest areas. I'm going to bump down now and choose a purple color called Violet because I want a blue-purple color to the end of these flowers. Now these could be anything, any type of flower you want it to be. I just really love the shades of blue and purple and in a cone shape. On my tracer, I do have a few individual 5 little petal flowers, and I'm going to be using those in the next step. Right now, all I'm doing is tapping light shades of blue and light shades of purple. They're mixed to being about tea consistency is what I'm looking for. I want my watercolor to be very translucent so I can see through it. Now this is going to dry slightly lighter because watercolor is just the opposite of acrylic paint. My watercolor paint is going to dry lighter. I'm going to go ahead and move into the leaf area. Most of my leaves aren't necessarily touching the purple, but even if they are, I'm okay with some of that purple bleeding into my green leaves. Watercolor has a unique property that it always wants to flow wherever the paper is wet. So if I want my green to just be green, then I need to make sure that anything that's touching my leaves is already dry. Then it will stop. It won't travel any farther than where the paper is wet. I'm starting with a light color of green called tree green, and then I'm tapping in my next color down in my color set is called Hooker's Green, and I'm just tapping a little bit of that in for the shadow color. I'm choosing a side of where I want the shadow, and on this particular painting, I'm going to be choosing the right-hand side. I often choose the right-hand side of being the darkest area, so that's where I'm going to be laying in the shadows. Now I'm going to take those same shades of green and I'm going to water them down even more. I want this to be more of like almost a shadowy color in the background. And I'm adding in just some simple leaf strokes. I didn't draw them in with my pencil. I just want them to be very faint in the background. And I'm duplicating some of the shapes I already have painted on there for the green. And I'm also kind of tapping in just a little bit of whimsical, just subtle tones of green. I'm just using off to the side what I've already used on the large greens into the background. This is just going to fill in that space and give my painting even more a sense of depth by having those shadowy color of leaves in the background. Since my flowers are fairly wet, I'm going to give them a chance to dry before I were to go do the next layers. I'm going to start on the water inside of the jar. I'm mixing the color sky blue to about tea consistency. I'm going to go vertical, up and down, underneath first, but then where the top of my water is, I'm going to be painting that horizontal. I'm just doing that color all over where the water area is. My water jar is only filled half full, and I created that ellipse shape at the top. That's where the top of the water is. Now I'm going to add a little bit of shadow inside of my jar and on my water, and I'm going to be taking a little bit of the Payne's Gray and mixing the Payne's Gray into my blue, and I'm creating a shadow. So I'm going off to the side, a little bit on the top. I'm going to follow the bottom of the jar, where it's drawn another ellipse shape down below because you're going to be able to see through it, so you're going to see that bottom. Now this is the trick that you need to use to create more of a glass feeling. I'm rinsing my brush off, squeezing it in my hand so it's slightly damp, and then I'm running it down and removing some of the color. It's called lifting color. I want to make sure I have that brighter shade or highlight right on that part. For the color of my glass, I'm going to be mixing up kind of a green-blue. I'm using emerald green deep and some of the sky blue and mixed it together to create a really pretty green-blue glass. Now this blue-green color does have to go over the water, so that where the water is, that's going to be slightly more blue because that's underneath and you're going to see it through because watercolor is transparent. So I'm still going to have that feeling of that there's water, but up above where the water is not painted, it's going to be that lighter greenish blue. Again, I'm going to rinse off my brush, take that damp one, and then create that highlight again. So I want it to be a fairly nice little swoop of white, light, bright color there. And by having that there, it's going to give it that reflective feel of what glass looks like. Hopefully you can see in the camera the differences and the layers that it makes by having the blue-green and then just the blue of the water and how it makes a difference. And you can see that there is water and that there is a glass color. The way I painted this jar, it reminds me of a mason jar that's blue-green, and I wanted to include a little rim, like a metal rim on the top. So to create that look, I took some of my black in my set that's called coal black, and I watered it down a lot. Like there's not hardly any pigment in there at all. I'm just brushing that with the tip of my brush a little bit here and there on that rim to give it that look of that perhaps it's metal. So I'm looking forward to keep some of those bright whites to let it feel more like it's a metal look. My top flowers have dried enough now, so I'm going to be layering in that next layer of shadows. So I'm taking my colors, that blue and that purple, and I've mixed it more, again, like a coffee or maybe just even a little bit toward cream, but I still want some translucent color into it. Now this is where I'm going to follow some of the patterns of the 5-leaf flowers that I have drawn. They're in pencil, so the pencil line is going to be able to show up just a little bit. I'm going to be following some of those 5-leaf ones that I have drawn in, but I'm also going to just be randomly tapping some of those colors in. So I'm going to be using the blue first, and then I went ahead and I tapped in some of the purple. Now these are the shadows, so I don't want to lose all the highlights that I originally put on. So when you're doing this step, be aware of how much color you're putting on. You can always add more. It's always a little harder to take watercolor out, especially after it's dried. So be aware that this next step is you're painting the shadows. You're looking for that dark areas inside of your flowers. Those ones that we originally put on are going to be the highlights. When I'm doing this step 2, I'm being aware of around my daisies. I'm not wanting a whole lot of that purple color to be in there. So I'm trying to be mindful of where my daisies are. I'm not using any masking fluid. I'm just leaving my daisies just plain, so I'm painting around those areas. It's okay to take some of that purple if you'd like and tap it around your petals to fill in some of those spaces but around your daisies, because we want those daisies to kind of be front and center, especially that one in the very front. We want that flower to make it look like it is sitting in the very front. So you can add some either of that dark purple or add some of the green next to those petals so that it's going to, in the end, it's going to look like it's sitting out front. And then I'm going to just repeat that same process on my other purple flower. After I got the flowers painted, I wanted to give that area plenty of time to dry before I worked on any more of the flowers. So I wanted to start working a little bit more on the glass. I'm taking the color Payne's Gray and I'm mixing it to about coffee consistency again, and I'm going to be adding another shadow layer to this. So you can see I'm mostly focusing on the outside around the jar, but I did add another darker layer to the top of the water. I'm doing a shadow layer at the bottom of the glass where that ellipse shape is there. And then I'm also going to be adding a little bit shadow around the very top of that metal ring. By doing all of this little areas of shadow, it's going to make this jar look like it's more curved and it's not just a flat image. Now you can soften your shadows by rinsing your brush out, squeezing the water out of it, and then just kind of softly tickling those lines. If you feel like you have too many bands and the color doesn't look soft enough for a shadow line, you can easily solve that problem by trying that trick. You can see where I added a little bit more definition around the bottom of the jar because you would be able to see that. And again, you can try softening the lines again. Now here I'm coming back in and redefining that bright highlight, rinsing my brush out with clear water and coming back in to make sure I didn't lose any of that bright highlight there. I'm going to take a little bit more of that gray color I had mixed up and I'm painting it vertically up and down where the little grooves are. Here I'm kind of cleaning up my edges a little bit. Some of my paint, my blue, kind of bled into my tag, and I was going to be painting my tag kind of more of a golden-y kind of color, so I wanted to keep that edges as clean as I could. So I went in with some clean water and tickled that paper area where my tag was to try to lift any of that color of blue that I didn't want. Now that my purple flowers had plenty of time to dry, I'm taking some of the Payne's Gray and I had once again mixed it to a very thin consistency. And I'm choosing which side of the daisy I want to have the shadow on, and I'm going to stick to the right side. So on each side of the petals, on the right side, I'm going to be painting just a small little dark shadow of the Payne's Gray. When I say dark, I mean not really super dark, but it's going to help my flowers, my daisies, look more white if I add a little bit of shadow. Now I'm going to start working on, and I'm just going to call these a poppy flower. I do a lot of made up flowers. It's just flower fun. They don't have to be exact, but this has a poppy feel where the flowers are more oval in shape, and they're starting out with this orange color, and then I'm mixing in a little bit of red. Again, these colors are mixed to about tea to coffee consistency, and I'm tapping in the colors. I started with the orange first, and then now I'm tapping in a little bit of that red. Now, if your red doesn't quite move because the flowers they don't have enough water on it, you can always take a little clean water and add a little bit of water to those flowers to get that color to move. Because my flowers are going to have a black center, I mixed up a little bit of the black and I tapped it into my flower even when it was wet. I kind of like the way it looks when that black kind of flows out into the red a little bit. I'm going to be adding another layer of the orange and the red, but you can kind of see how that color just bled into my orange and red. You want to put a very little bit of that black in there, otherwise you're going to end up with a black flower, but it's a fun technique if you'd like to try it. Or you could just wait till the end and let your oranges dry and then add your darker centers. Now I wanted to go ahead and add a little bit more depth to my leaves, so I'm choosing the colors of the hooker's green, and I think I added a little emerald green in there too, but I'm adding a few more shadows to those leaves. Mostly the leaves are going to be darker as I go back to touch the flowers. I didn't add any more color to the ones that were more shadowy in the background. I didn't add another layer of green to that. I'm only focusing on the leaves that are more drawn and more complete and more prominent in the front. To paint the bow for my jar, I decided to use the color yellow ochre. I love the colors of blue and yellow together, so I thought this would be a nice little pop of color in the front of my jar. I mixed the yellow ochre to about coffee consistency. It's going to have a couple layers, so this is just the first one, and this is basically just a more of like a color book style. I'm just adding the color, filling my space. It's pretty small, so I'm not trying to get highlights or too many shadows in this stage. To paint the little heart on the front, I used more of that color, Payne's Gray, and added it just to the little heart. I like that idea of repeating the colors and throughout my painting. So I wanted to paint that and give it plenty of time to dry before I started the little tag process. So that's why I painted the heart right now. Since my poppies had had plenty of time to dry, I'm moving up to that area again and adding some more layers, the same colors I originally put on, that brighter orange and the darker reds, and tapping those in with the tip of my paintbrush. I'm trying to make sure I leave some of the original that I had painted on originally because those are the highlights, and so this one is the next colors down. I'm going to be adding a darker shade onto my center of my daisies. So I mixed up a little bit of the umber color with some of the golden color that I had used in the middle. And I'm just choosing the bottom edge of where it touches the petals and creating that little shadow area on each of the daisies. I'm using some of those colors I just used up on the daisies. I'm using that down on the tag. Taking a little bit darker color and that brown or that burnt brown color, and I'm adding a slight little shadow around the edge. And because my tag is still wet, when I add that darker color to the edges, it should just naturally draw to the center and create a nice little blended look on its own. There is a little round circle at the top of my tag, and I'm going to be painting that even a darker color, so I'm going to paint that after I finish this stage. But I'm adding a shadow area around that little round hole. I forget what they're called. It's where it's like a tag area where so it doesn't pull out. I don't know what they're called. But anyway, I'm going to be painting that a slightly darker color, so I'm going to leave that next. Now here, since the orange had plenty of time to dry, I'm coming back in with some of that black and I'm tapping it into the centers of those little poppy areas, and I'm choosing an area that is going to be the darkest. So again, at the bottom and to the right. Taking a little bit more of that golden color, and I'm going to be repainting that bow. Now if you have a smaller brush, you could try adding a little bit of a shadow area, and I should have maybe used my newer brush that I had that has a really nice little long tip on it to see if I could have made a shadow area, but I basically just added a slightly different color just to add here and there and give my little bow some definition. And here I'm going in and painting that little paper circle, the round circle. I added a little bit of rust to it and made it a little bit darker than what the tag is. Now you can notice I do have an area inside of there that is white where the hole is for my tag. I need to make sure I go back and paint that blue, and I do in the end. Now for my background, I decided to use more of the yellow ochre color, and I basically mixed up a color about the consistency of coffee. It's not overly thick. I wanted the background just to be very subtle, so I've just chose an area where I thought I could stop and start paint and not have a dry line. And then I continue to move my brush randomly so it's not all a smooth surface. I like seeing some of the brush strokes in my painting. Now if you like it more smooth, you can take your time and do more of a smooth application of paint. I also pick up a little bit of that rusty color umber and add it to my golden color to add a little bit more depth to that background. One solid color just doesn't look right. You'll either need to add 2 layers of the gold or choose another color, and I chose to use the umber color to add a little bit more shadow to the edges and underneath that jar. And after painting my background, I realized I forgot to paint the stems inside of the jar. So I took the color Hooker's Green and I just mixed it up into a light consistency, and I went ahead and painted the stems. They're not a really super big element, but they do need to be painted. So I just added basically 1 step of green on those. I'm going to give my painting plenty of time to dry, and then I'm going to start the pen work. My favorite black pens to use are the Micron pens. They're a permanent ink, and they're always a go-to pen for me. I'm going to be using the size 01 nib to create the black outlines. I thought perhaps I might be using a little bit of white and with using the Uniball pen, but I pretty much just stick to the black and the 01 size. To add the little line work on this to the center of my poppies, I wanted to add that little seed area has these little hairs that come up in the centers with little round balls on those. So I add those to the centers of my poppies to add a little bit more detail. And then I'm going just very loosely, light pressure with my pen to create little lines that are just very subtle and here and there and that very sketchy pattern. I didn't really want to have a complete outline look for this, a strong presence of black. I just wanted to have some here and there. For around my flowers, for the daisies, again, I don't want all the black lines all around all of the little petals. I only want it here and there. I'm okay with not following exact with my petals. I'm actually going a little farther out. And I love that look of the hand-drawn sketch look to it. Keep your hand a little loose when you're doing this process if you would like that loose feel to yours as well. I add the small little detail of going vertical up and down on that little metal rim, a few little areas here and there. And I just casually go around the bow and again, just real loose around the tag. For the lettering, I just follow what I had originally done on mine, and you can add whatever sentiment that you would like to add in yours, but I like the idea of it being a card and writing thank you on there. For the edge of the glass, I don't want a continuous line, so I just do a little bit of line work, then do some dashes. You could add in a few little wiggle lines if you would like, but I like that very random quality and not so exact all the way around. And I just continue on that throughout the whole picture, adding the random line work. I think it really finished off this piece really well. And now I could have gone in and added a few little white flowers, which might have looked good, and I could have added that with my Uniball pen, but I decided to just stop at this particular stage and just leave it with the black pen work. I used a pencil and I signed my name at the bottom. For my original painting, I was going to be attaching it to a card, so I needed to add a clear coat on the top, and I like using the Rust-Oleum. And then I used some spray glue, the Gorilla Glue, to attach it to my card. Now this particular painting, I was going to be putting it into a frame with glass, so I didn't need to add any clear coat whatsoever. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment. It really does help my channel grow. If you enjoyed watching this tutorial, here's a couple more you might want to check out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.